Hi everyone and welcome back to Stephan Livera podcast brought to you by Bold. For American listeners, you can buy Bitcoin over at getbold.io. Now joining me on the show today are Sims and David Seroy. Sims is the CEO and founder of Alpen Labs and David is the ecosystem lead. So first off, welcome to the show, Sims and David.
Thanks for having us, Stephan.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to talk a bit about ZK Rollups, what does it mean for Bitcoin, and of course what you guys are working on with Alpen and Strata, which I understand as your particular rollup. But maybe let's just start with a little bit of the, I guess, for people to understand, what are some of the benefits? I know, David, you did a whiteboard video. I had a quick look through that. And of course, listeners, I'll put that in the show notes for those interested. So maybe you want to just recapitulate, just so people can understand a bit of the why, like why care about this stuff. What are some of the benefits of doing all this ZK, zero knowledge rollup stuff?
Go ahead and take it. Yeah, I mean, a ZK rollup is an alternative layer 2 scaling solution for Bitcoin. Many of us, I imagine that listen to your podcast, Stephan, are very familiar with Lightning Network. And that is, for a while, kind of been the primary way that we look to scale Bitcoin. ZK rollups are just an alternative way that offer a different set of trade-offs. They're probably most similar to something like sidechains, except sidechains were a concept that introduced essentially a second blockchain where you could bridge your BTC into them and then perform more programmability and expressivity with your Bitcoin. The problem is sidechains never solved what was called like the trustless two-way peg. Anytime you wanted to bridge your Bitcoin into this other side system, you would essentially have to rely on an honest majority of trusted entities. The key breakthrough with ZK rollups is we're able to drastically reduce that trust assumption and make it to where it's what's called like a one-of-n trust assumption, where as long as one person is honest, then the bridge is essentially secure. And this is a pretty profound breakthrough and something that a lot of people are starting to get excited about. And I'll just end this by saying that something like Lightning Network is, hyper optimized for kind of fast throughput, high transaction volume payments, but maybe it lacks in certain areas like expressivity and programmability. Something like a ZK rollup can give us the opposite side of the trade-offs, where you can add pretty much abundant and infinite amounts of expressivity and programmability, but it does have other trade-offs like on the throughput side. So that's kind of a quick overview of why ZK rollups and what they offer.
Great. And so I guess the point is to offer a different set of trade-offs in an L2, whether that's UX, programmability, scale, these kinds of, these are sort of the main things. And I guess some people may have heard of ZK rollups. Some of them might think of it as a privacy thing. Some of them may think of it as a scalability thing. And then others might think of it as they want quote unquote smart contracts or some additional thing that cannot be done, at least today, with what we have today on Bitcoin script natively in L1 Bitcoin. And that's why there's this, I guess, exploration and these ideas around ZK rollups. Now, maybe, I guess, a quick point just to maybe distinguish, because I think over the last, let's say, year and a half to 2 years, there was a lot of excitement about quote unquote Bitcoin L2s, right? There was a whole new, group of them that came up. Now, some of them were kind of seen as kind of being a bit of like a shitcoin thing, or it was like a shitcoin rebranding. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that and where Alpen Labs fits into that, and just explain a bit of that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take this on. I mean, I think on your general question as well, like I see myself and also our team, we're two things. Like, we're technologists. We like building and tinkering and enabling sort of solutions, financial contracts. These kinds of things are really interesting to us. Of what can you actually do in a permissionless network? Can you really tinker around with it? At the same time, we're really, we're Bitcoiners. We believe in Bitcoin as money, and we think it's the best money, and that ultimately that is the sort of on top of that foundation is where the most interesting financial contracts and DeFi essentially, or on-chain finance, really builds out, along with other kinds of use cases. And so, like that's how we see this. And when we started this project, this was some time back now. There are folks on our team that wrote some of the earliest works on validity rollups. So John Light published a paper on Bitcoin rollups rollup.org, I believe. I think that's the website. This was late 2023, and even before that, Trey Delbonis, who's one of the protocol engineers on our team, he actually had the very first design around Bitcoin ZK Rollups. He worked on Lightning extensively at the DCI and worked on this new technology. And this was even earlier, I think dates to 2022. On the team, as one of the founders here, when we were starting this venture, we sort of landed on this thesis out of just like first principles thinking of, look, Bitcoin is the most dominant asset, and there's going to be it's going to continue that dominance, and there needs to be a truly open platform that is programmable for the technologists like ourselves, and for many that have actually left to other ecosystems to be able to build and experiment with various types of contracts. And some of those will win, and some of those will provide what we think would be, for example, the best rates to borrow against Bitcoin, or these kinds of really novel applications for the Bitcoin ecosystem. And our thesis sort of was, right now the sidechains are still like early, and they haven't really solved that problem for a lot of these thinkers and technologists. And so we saw it coming from really a revolution two ways, one in money through Bitcoin, and the other one in computation, in verifiable compute, which is another way of saying ZK, or validity proofs and this kind of thing. The idea that you can actually now take a program that arbitrary program that would take a very long time to run on a beefy machine and generate a cryptographic signature, essentially a proof that attests to that program running in in a valid way, means that you don't actually have to execute all of that program. You can just verify the proof, right? And this felt like, and this is not a new technology. It's been around for decades. But what we saw in that revolution was a rapid commoditization of, it's cheaper, faster, more compatible than ever to be able to create these zero knowledge proofs. Validity proofs is probably the right way to say it. There's also a privacy element to that as well. We're primarily, using the succinctness property of, turns out like verifying computation is much, much, much cheaper, almost fixed cost compared to actually executing a computation. And that plus Bitcoin made a lot of sense. Bitcoin's a ledger here designed for money, designed to verify computation. From the earliest Bitcoin forum talks, we saw this. And so we built this company around, look, these two revolutions are going to intersect here. And there's this really unique opportunity to build really interesting types of layer twos, especially if we can get Bitcoin to reason about these, cryptographic primitives like zero knowledge proofs. So that's how we built out the, that was the origin really of the company. I think we were the very first team to raise on a Bitcoin rollup or ZK plus Bitcoin kind of thesis. And then after that was very surprising, because I remember this is kind of during the bear market, we were trying to raise, there were some investors that had even said, we love the team. It's, 4 MIT co-founders, etc. Build exactly what you're building, but on Ethereum. Do another Ethereum L2. And we were like, absolutely not. And we didn't take some of that money. It was just unclear to the market at that time that this is like why this made sense. But as a result, we ended up getting some fantastic investors that really believed in Bitcoin in our seed round. 6 months later, this is now like a narrative, essentially, right, in the ecosystem of, wait, yeah, it does make sense. Like actually maybe rollups make even more sense in the context of Bitcoin than Ethereum. It's not just about scaling. It's all these other benefits like programmability and privacy that Bitcoin layer 1 previously didn't have because of the script limitations.
Yeah.
And so,
and just to be clear, sorry, on that point, from your perspective, do you see what you're building as mainly a scalability thing, a privacy thing, or enabling smart contract? Like, would you have, is there an answer, or is it kind of like a general purpose thing in your view?
It is all of the above, Stephan. I mean, look, it's not going to be as scalable as Lightning. It's not. Like there's, in terms of if you want the like full security of Bitcoin, there's an element of, putting DA or data availability on Bitcoin, which offers some, benefits. We've run the numbers. It's, 30 to 50x seems reasonable in terms of improving that throughput. There's also latency benefits, like you can have much faster confirmations, etc. That can be secured in different ways. But it's not going to be lightning in terms of the scalability. But it's also dramatically improved in terms of the security from like a sidechain model that relies on a majority of multi-sig or something like that. So it's going to be a lot more expressive than Lightning. And in an open platform, what that means is anyone in the world can go and build really interesting things without touching like layer 1 or introducing new risks to layer 1. They could do this on layer 2. And ZK is the abstraction where we can verify all of those transactions, put these signatures on Bitcoin, and settle and inherit the double spend security of Bitcoin, essentially. And so it's all of the above. But we're excited about I think primarily improving UX, improving privacy, and just the expressivity and the opening this up to technologists essentially that have previously haven't had gotten to tinker around as much within Bitcoin.
Got it. Okay, so let's try to overview a little bit of what it would look like in kind of layman's terms, or in language that let's say the intelligent layman can understand without necessarily being a super Bitcoin protocol nerd. And I'm gonna use the analogy of Liquid, just because people might have used, let's say, like Aqua Wallet on their phone. And so that wallet, as an example, keeps your balance in Liquid Bitcoin. And it uses kind of swaps in the background to do like Lightning and swapping and things like this. But essentially what that is when this user is holding Liquid Bitcoin, it's custodied by the Federation effectively. So in the Liquid example, it's like, I think it's 11 or 12 or 15 multi-sig. That's kind of who actually holds the Bitcoin. And what you hold is L-BTC, and you're trading around inside the Liquid ecosystem and swapping around with that. So I guess kind of a loose analogy is in this zero knowledge context, and I presume in Strata it's like this, that the user can kind of peg in to the zero knowledge system and also peg out of the zero knowledge system, and meanwhile transact inside of that ecosystem amongst other people who can so-called speak, Strata, or speak that zero knowledge system. But the interesting difference is, instead of it being based on that 11 or 12 or 15 multi-sig, it's actually based on this zero knowledge verifier. And the idea is that there may be a sequencer who's kind of collating some of those things, but they still can't lie to you. And the idea is that the user can still unilaterally exit. Is that broadly kind of the overview?
Yeah.
What am I missing there? Yeah.
I'll try to take a stab at this just to kind of like set the stage for every single layer 2. Conceptually, it looks like the same thing, where you're taking BTC that exists on the layer 1 and you're locking it somehow on the layer 1. And then you're representing that BTC on some sort of L2. In Lightning, you're representing it as, sats in the Lightning network. In Liquid, you're representing it as LBTC. In Alpen, maybe representing it as A-BTC. And essentially, some sort of activity will happen on this layer 2, whether we're just transferring funds amongst each other, or you're doing DeFi, or you're doing it doesn't matter. Somehow there is some balances, like all of our balances on this L2 change. The fundamental problem with all L2s that make Bitcoin difficult to scale is effectively an Oracle problem. How do you relay that, hey, some action, some change in balances happened on this L2, and how can you relay that back to Bitcoin? And we could just have, we could say, okay, Bitcoin, we want to add programmability to it, or we want to make the blocks bigger so that I can understand and kind of grok what happened on this L2. But we can't do that because we don't want to cause centralization in the network, and we don't want to add changes to Bitcoin. We want to keep it small and minimalist. So functionally, it's again this kind of Oracle problem, where how do you represent what happened in the L2, any L2, back to the Bitcoin layer 1? In something like Liquid, yes, they have this honest majority, this federation, where you're trusting that the majority of the people will say, hey, Stephan, your balance is now this. I'm going to, honor that on the layer 1. In Lightning Network, every time you make a transfer, the two parties in the channel sign off, and they essentially relay, or they're kind of the Oracle, back to the layer 1. With a zero knowledge rollup, a zero knowledge proof is a way to mathematically prove the validity of a statement without having to recompute all that work. So if all three of us start changing all of our balances and doing all this work, Bitcoin layer 1 doesn't need to know about all the stuff that we did. It simply just receives the final result along with a zero knowledge proof that proves that with mathematical certainty what your balance is. It proves to Bitcoin that all of the transactions that happened had valid signatures, or that there were no double spends, or that or that all of these transactions happened in the right order. And so it allows us to have these arbitrary programmability environments of any sort of execution environment or coding language that you want on the layer 2. Bitcoin doesn't need to be aware of any of it. It doesn't care if you did Fartcoin and NFT and DeFi or whatever. It just says, look, mathematically prove to me that you followed my rules. If you did that, I really don't care. And that's the magic of a zero knowledge proof, is it converts the scaling paradigm in Bitcoin from a computation paradigm where we're saying, hey, Bitcoin, you have to recompute all of this activity of Fartcoin and all this stuff on these layers, to instead just a verification platform. Bitcoin just simply receives the zero knowledge proof and says, this is what, like, I don't need to know what happened on the layer 2, but here's the final state. Check. We're done. The final thing I'll just say is, just to make sure I circle back on one of your questions you asked, Stephan, is like, in this whole layer 2 boom that has happened over the past year, yeah, like, frankly, there is a lot of like grift still out there. And if you dive into many of these things, they're just multi-sigs by any other name. And they also, are introducing new tokens that say, hey, we need this token in order to like create consensus or whatever. Fundamentally, a ZK rollup, allows us to kind of abstract away a lot of this centralization, not even abstract away, it like just to get rid of these centralization vectors, and then also not having to introduce new tokens for consensus, where the gas fee or the fees are paid in Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin is all you need. And so yeah, like, there's it's sometimes hard to discern what's real and fake, but ZK rollups I think are pretty much the closest thing we have to these like real breakthroughs in innovation and adding programmability to Bitcoin. So I'll pause there for a second, and hopefully that
Sure. Yeah.
helped.
Okay. And
I think
and then just around kind of the mechanics of it. Oh, Sims, did you something?
Well,
something
yeah. I
you wanted
mean,
to
I
say
think
there?
you had some important questions there as well. I think we should really clarify this, because especially as it relates to what David said of, there's so many teams in this space now, and it's become a narrative, and it's sort of, people are saying, oh, look, there's trustless this, trustless that, or unilateral exits here, or whatnot. I just want to set the record clear in terms of where things are, right, with all the roll up stuff, and be, upfront and honest about this, which is, we have a compelling solution that I think is production ready, and we are pushing this into production ready. That's what our team's been focused on, getting this out into mainnet later this year. And the reality is, today we still have certain limitations, right, on Bitcoin. We don't have covenant opcodes. We don't have and so the design right now reflects that we're building and shipping to production is a significant improvement on the majority. Signers have to, multi-sig have to be honest, etc. But it is not a fully trustless solution, in that there is a one of n, when we think about the BTC that's held, right, in the deposits, right, into the system, the BTC that's held on Bitcoin is put into this n of n multi-sig. It's locked in this n of n multi-sig contract. So what that means is, if all n decide to collude, they could move those funds out. Now, the set of signers that folks we've been talking to are geographically located all around the world. A lot of them recognizable names already, important qualified custodians, etc. And so having at least one out of those n be honest, in order for those deposits not to get moved out, is much better than a 2 of 3, let's say, which I believe that's WBTC today, or just unilateral, fully trusting Coinbase alone on CBBTC. We think that's a much better model already. And so we have to do this covenant emulation via n of n multisig. So that's one component of it. And it also, means, with introduction of some covenants, and our team has been already working on a lot of the research of, like, okay, if we had this opcode, then how would we improve the design here or there? We think with most of the covenant proposals that are there today, we would be able to get rid of the, N of N holding this on. But the reality is where we are and where really any team is in this space is that there is this 1 of N assumption, that exists. And what that means for unilateral exits as well is, there's a 1 of N sort of functional assumption on the withdrawals. So as long as 1 out of the N entities, bridge operators as we call them, are functional, follow the protocol, etc., then exits will be there. But that is the
That's the current state of the trade-off, right? Yeah.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card.
This episode brought to you by Galoy. They are building banking software for the Bitcoin age. So if you are with a bank, a fintech, or a startup looking to offer some kind of Bitcoin product, whether that is a Bitcoin collateralized loan, deposit accounts, or payments, Galoy can help you. Their latest product is called Lana. It is a loans management platform, and you can use this to come to market quickly and offer a loans or Bitcoin collateralized lending product for your customers. Now, Galoy have a lot of experience in the space. They started with Blink Wallet in 2020, and they've since grown this to become a community favorite over time. And so they have a lot of experience making things work in a secure, reliable, and scalable way. So if you need assistance coming to market quickly with a Bitcoin banking product, such as lending or deposits or payments, talk to the team at Galoy. You can email them. The email is biz@galoy.io, or go to the website galoy.io.
And now, back to the show.
Gotcha. So I guess just to summarize then, the idea is it's like you could peg your Bitcoin into A-BTC and trade it around, but the trade-off now, or the risk you're taking now, is that you're hoping that at least one of the bridge operators is honest. That's the main sort of trade-off we're dealing with, at least today, with current technology and so on. Can you guys also touch on, now I know this is another big topic over the last few years. I did an episode with Robin Linus about BitVM, BitVM 1. Now I know there's BitVM 2 and there's been further work there. So could you explain a little bit about how BitVM... Okay, so let me put the question this way. How does BitVM change things for you with A-BTC and, zero knowledge rollups?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this, unless David, you want to chime in. But it's BitVM 1 was really interesting. When it came out initially, we had frankly kind of dismissed the paper when it had initially come out, just because there's a lot involved there, and it felt like 5 research problems away. And we really cared about how do we bring this thing to production safely, right? And over time, definitely, we know Robin really well. The ideas definitely evolved there, and we started putting our own work. We had a protocol called Snarknado, which one of the issues that we saw with the original design is like, well, it's this like back and forth challenge response game that like 2 entities have to play for Bitcoin to be able to adjudicate who the winner is. And it's this multiple rounds. I think it was like 40 rounds, and each round's a week. It's like, you're 6 to 9 months at least to, for Bitcoin to be able to adjudicate the winner, which means withdrawals could be locked up for a while for some of these operators, right? And so that was the first work that we'd done in terms of the Snarknado effort, was like, how do we get the rounds down and, figure out a better, and so we'd gotten that down to 4 rounds. And this was in 2024, spring, I think. And of course, Robin then came out with BitVM 2, which is like, actually, you could do this with a single round. And even at that point, though, and not just that, it could be permissionless in terms of the challenger. Anyone can challenge. It doesn't have to be a fixed set of people. That felt pretty powerful. But it was still theoretical again. Like, it didn't seem like, okay, well, there's a big leap here. This is a brilliant idea that he had in terms of how to do it. Just to be clear, but it's like, how does this actually work in practice? Well, there's a big like on-chain footprint. Whenever there's a challenge, you have to put in like a ZK verifier on Bitcoin at that point was like close to 10 gigabytes, I think, written in Bitcoin script, because you only have add, you only have you don't even have a multiply opcode, etc. Right? And so doing a verifier for the ZK protocol in script was really big, and there were still some very important practical problems. And this was, I'm talking mid 2024, probably here at that point. We spent a ton of time, along with, it was incredible to see a lot of the open source community coming together. I mean, there's really people from at least a dozen time zones that are working on this around the clock, and have been for the last 6 months plus. But our team in particular, we published a couple of papers, one called On Proving Pairings, another one on like field arithmetic in Bitcoin, and so on. And our research engineering team implemented a lot of those ideas that allowed, along with contributions from others, but allowed particularly for the verifier to like make it much more optimized, to the point where we really think that like the on-chain footprint at this point is production ready. It's like the size of data that you actually have to put into Bitcoin in this BitVM 2 protocol, which is essentially someone makes a claim about arbitrary computation via Snark, and anyone can challenge that claim, and Bitcoin decides the winner within 1 to 2 week period. The whole protocol end to end is pretty solid. It doesn't require, it fits within the Bitcoin constraints, it fits within the block sizes, and economically as well, it is quite secure, to where we're already talking with various operators that are going to be playing, a role of a bridge operator, putting, some of these claims on chain, etc. And so I would say the last like 6 months especially has been a huge push from various teams, particularly from Alpen Labs, of focused on the verifier. How do we get this from, how do we do like 10 to 20x optimizations on the script size, on everything, on the amount of data you need to put on chain. And that has been achieved. You can follow along with the BitVM repository. We're pushing out a lot of the code fully public, and putting it there.
And so just to understand a little bit there, as I'm understanding, like as an example, in the Lightning case, when you have a Lightning wallet, your wallet like keeps, it's got its own version of what, I guess colloquially known as a justice transaction, and the end user, like his wallet, can theoretically broadcast that to kind of reclaim, or he can, let's say, force close the channel to get it back. In this context, though, as I'm understanding it, it wouldn't be like grandma on her phone is being the challenger. In this case, I presume it's more like a professional operator, one of those bridge operators, is the guy who's going to challenge if there is a kind of a dishonest state being attempted to be broadcast to the chain. Have I got that right, or can you explain a bit there?
Yeah.
It could be anyone, but yeah. Go ahead, David. Sorry.
No, Stephan, you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of these mechanisms that we're describing, the end user, the normal retail user, even frankly, like a power user, will probably never ever even be aware of any of this is happening. They'll bridge onto the layer 2 via these kind of fast, cheap bridges. And if there's ever any issues with the kind of underlying bridge, it would just be these kind of BitVM 2 style games with the zero knowledge proofs. This would all just be handled in the back end, and nobody would need to be the wiser.
I see. So as an example, even if people are familiar today, something like a bolts.exchange or SideShift or SideSwap, these kinds of guys, they're the ones who are going to be like helping people bridge in and out of whether it's maybe Liquid on one side or Lightning on the other or A-BTC on one side and L-BTC on the other, and they're kind of going to allow people to swap all between. And then at each of those companies, there'll be like professional, runner operators who are like running this stuff to, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
It's the peg, the 1-to-1 peg is set by the bridge that we're building, right? Like that's what gives, the A-BTC, as we're talking about, like value and holding the 1-to-1. Now, once A-BTC is available there, you can have, trustless atomic swaps, as you're describing. A lot of these companies can facilitate like permissionless, even trustless atomic swaps between A-BTC and BTC in both directions. Because you already have, a pool of A-BTC there, a pool of BTC there. And so anyone that wants to go into the system or come out of the system, they can do so via these, alternative swaps. They don't have to go through the foundational bridge that we are building. And for the end user, the UX could be, much, much better, much faster doing so. But importantly,
actually, could we just on the point of go on, finish your point? I just want to ask another. Go on.
The important point of like, okay, then the natural question is like, why are we even kind of doing that bridge, right? There needs to be, almost think of it like this is what sets the peg to be 1-to-1 between the two BTCs, right? And then in terms of the like functionally how you get between each one of them, that could be done via multiple different options for the end user.
I see. And so just to, I guess, make it tangible or a little more easy to grasp for listeners, if they are an end user, can you just talk through like what would that look like? Is it just going to look like, an app on your phone and I want to send some A-BTC to David, he shows me his QR code, I scan it and I pay it? Or like, is there, like what kind of UX is possible in this context?
I think it would look very similar to something like what people are familiar with Aqua Wallet, except it's just not trusted. It's not centralized. I'll also add that, once you have something like a ZK Rollup where you can add expressivity and programmability, you can start building functionality, what's known as like account abstraction. And so this is an extremely, extremely underrated aspect of having programmability is like, for example, like on my phone right here, there is like a dedicated hardware wallet in here. There's essentially like a ledger or a Trezor inside of here. But because of the kind of restrictions that Bitcoin and Lightning have, like you really can't use that hardware wallet inside of your phone. But if you can add this expressivity to Bitcoin, then you could use, Face ID to securely, scan your face and send transactions that way. Or you can start doing payments where instead of it's just being like push style payments where you're paying an invoice, maybe you could set up, subscriptions where people would start pulling from that. Or maybe, you can cover someone else's costs. If we're onboarding, millions of people, we can cover their initial gas fees on their behalf. Or if people want to use stable coins to pay gas fees, people can use stable coins. So it's, as a kind of baseline to recap, something similar to what people are using maybe with like Aqua Wallet, but it can be taken even to the next level where we have world-class payment UX that people are familiar with when they go to, Cash App or Venmo or all these things. Like all of that is actually possible without adding the centralized trusted intermediaries. And that's, even for the most ardent of Bitcoin maximalists, something that I think is hard to deny.
I see. Yeah.
What's
now I think on the
it's great
go on,
for
Sim.
the technologists, right? Like it's great for like someone wants to build the world-class UX and just abstract away all of the things to the end user. They can do that because there's more tools at their disposal. They can make authorizing transactions fully programmatic, and users can opt in to use such wallets and services where you could like to the end user, just like, hey, I authorize this thing to be able to take out this amount once a month. It's a subscription, right? And those experiences that all the tech stuff is abstracted away can be built in a clean way by the technologists, because with account abstraction, as Dave was saying, like you can programmatically, you can program how authorization of that particular account whenever they're sending transactions, how that actually works. And so it's just more tools at the developer side to create these kinds of experiences that allow, for just intuitive use, intuitive transactions, and new types of payments and transactions as well.
Interesting. Now, I guess one, maybe it's a counter argument. I'm just curious to hear what you guys think. Isn't it going to be really hard to build up another whole network effect, right? Think about Lightning. First, I think the white paper was from maybe 2015, if I recall correctly. The first mainnet Lightning was 2018, and even then it was very clunky. Even 2019, 2020, it was kind of clunky-ish. I mean, yeah, power users could do it and developers could do it, but no one below that. Nowadays, Lightning is, relatively easy, but there's been a lot of work to get it there. So with ZK Rollups, isn't this creating like another whole network effect that you have to start building up?
I would really challenge you on that, and I would actually say that it's the opposite. On these ZK rollups, like right now, what you're able to bridge into, what we're building is an EVM compatible rollup. The EVM ecosystem has absurd, insane amounts of tooling. As much as we want to dog on it about like most of the applications are kind of garbage, and you have tokens and all this stuff. Like the reality is there is a orders of magnitude larger network effect for the kind of tooling and the development resources for EVM than there is for Lightning. On top of that, with this kind of power of ZK rollups, like you could even build like other execution environments. Like there are things aside from Ethereum's EVM. There's the Solana VM. Maybe there's something like Starkware's Cairo. There's like Stax's Clarity. There's JavaScript-based languages. There's pure Rust-based languages. With the power of a zero-knowledge proof, you could take any existing network effect where there could be millions and millions of developers and tooling, and with the power of a zero-knowledge proof, you can program all of that in any environment that you want, and you can compress that into this succinct proof, which can be verified by Bitcoin. So with ZK, like definitively, out of all the trade-offs, this idea that like, hey, you have to bootstrap an entire network effect, that is something that I think ZK will dominate in. You could think of it almost like a translation tool, where we can take any existing kind of like language and network effect, and we can compress that into something that Bitcoin can understand. So that idea of bootstrapping a new ecosystem, I think ZK Rollups has that in spades.
We can give tangible examples of this too. I mean, we've been doing a ton of partnership BD sort of calls, like on the, for example, like Block Explorer side, there's several different options that immediately integrate, because they integrate not at the Ethereum consensus level necessarily. They integrate at the, like they're compatible with the EVM as a language and execution environment. It could be Oracle networks that have been around and safe for many, many, many years. Most kind of distributed Oracle networks. EVM, we can already integrate. We have audited code. Solidity works. RPCs, indexers, stablecoins that we've been, some teams that we've been chatting with, some of the top stablecoin issuers. Well, we're familiar with the EVM. We have code. It's already audited, etc. We might need like, certain other, like we might need a Fireblocks, on the custody side or something else, like maybe Chainalysis if it's a centralized stablecoin, right, for compliance for their side. All of these guys, again, we already, are familiar with the EVM. If you're EVM compatible, the access to integrate in all of those solutions is instant. And so there's this like industry around, like it's like I liken it to like, JavaScript or something like that. It's a language that is compatible already with a bunch of different companies that frankly we do get to benefit from while using Bitcoin and being secured through Bitcoin.
Interesting. And so it's a fair point you make around the compatibility with different ecosystems, let's say. So who would you say are the target users, or who are going to be the, let's say, the natural early users of this kind of product, or who are the first people who will actually be users of A-BTC as an ecosystem in this example?
What I personally would like to see is I think what Bitcoin has definitively gotten right over the entire rest of our industry is this, commitment to money. Like money is the core revolution. And I think breaking out of these kind of like degeneracy, just kind of recursive points and token schemes, like I'm sure some of that will exist when you have a permissionless system. But for us personally, like we want to break out of that and actually provide real world use cases to people that need stable coins, that need borrowing products, that need wonderful like payment user experiences, like the entire core revolution that that Bitcoin was originally built on. We think we can extend that vision and really go after that market. So for me personally, those are the first users that I want to go after. People who actually need and value money, and as an extension of that, finance.
Yeah. And Sims, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to be concrete again, like I'll give like one example of an application we're really excited about, right? I think it's Bitcoin-backed borrowing, like borrowing dollars against Bitcoin, but borrowing stable coins, which can be off-ramped fairly easily into dollars liquidity if you want against Bitcoin, or you can use that as a form of getting yield on the Bitcoin because it carries treasury rates, but you can also supply it into vaults that provide like the supply side for borrowers again, which is additional yield, right, on the stablecoin. So I guess like anyone, like the lending protocol is really fascinating to me because this is really big. If you look at the use cases of WBTC, for example, on Ethereum, I think that's like the largest use cases, tends to go towards the Aves, the Morphos, compounds, etc., where people are essentially borrowing dollars against Bitcoin. They don't want to sell Bitcoin. They want liquidity. And it's one of those things which I really do think like on-chain is like, uniquely positioned to do better than sort of off-chain solutions. It like you have large composable money markets, right, with aggregated liquidity, and that typically yields more stable rates, more lower rates, and better security as well. So your option as a Bitcoiner today is I could go in a custodial solution or a collaborative custody kind of solution, and there are companies that are offering some great services there, but it's at like 50% LTV to 15% interest or more to borrow against your Bitcoin. Or compare those to rates on like a Morpho, for example, which is on Base, and Coinbase had announced their big like Bitcoin-backed loans powered through Morpho on Base. That's at like 6.5 interest or some percent interest or something like that, with up to 86% LTV. And
I think it's at like 4.5% right now.
Is that right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is just going to be much more competitive on chain, and this model has been tested on Ethereum, right? You have like all the experiments have happened there, and we've been talking to some of those teams, and they're like, yeah, there's probably a much bigger market here on Bitcoin because BTC as the underlying collateral, right, is really valuable for this kind of lending solution. Anytime we've seen, most of the previous runs, we saw more custodial solutions emerge. Those went away, but BTC was the dominant collateral to borrow fiat against, and so that's a really interesting angle for Bitcoiners if they want the best rates with the best security. Of course, there's some really cool work going on at the DLCs, and I think like there's alternatives, but I really do think the ZK Rollups will ultimately have the best rates to borrow against Bitcoin, and we're really excited about launching out that use case.
So I could maybe summarize it then in one way, because there are already now, setting aside, let's say, as you mentioned, the Unchained Capitals and the Ledens of the world. But there are a lot of people who kind of more in shitcoin land who are using, let's say, WBTC or CBBTC. And I guess a lot of those users might come over to use this as well, right?
Why wouldn't everybody come over to use this? Like it outcompetes virtually every other borrowing, whether you want to talk about like TradFi, DLCs, WBTC, Leden, like HODL, Unchained. Like I think there's a compelling case where it's just like across the board. This could be
like
superior.
a white labeled version, essentially, right? Or like
Right.
you don't need to take balance sheet risks as you can plug in on chain, have the best rates with great security, and do this. And yeah, this is like an interesting thing. Maybe the end user is like, all right, yeah, maybe I'll kind of trust like a more custodial BTC thing, or even trust like like CBBTC. I'm fine with trusting Coinbase. That's fine. I'll go do it there. Sure, we think that that exists, absolutely. Like there's a chunk of the market that's like this, but like think about it now reverse from other exchanges that that want to offer borrow against your BTC and
Right.
get loans.
The non-Coinbase
experience.
exchanges who don't operate CBBTC.
Are they
Right.
going to want to do that? CBBTC on base, or like the WBTC solution that is again going through kind of more shaky governance. Are they going to want to integrate, like seeing how Coinbase is integrated into DeFi to offer that to their distribution to their users? Like there's interest in doing that because there's again less balance sheet risk, less operational overhead, and just the best rates. And so from the exchange side and the folks with distribution, if they want to offer borrow against Bitcoin solution, they could plug in to the L2 to the
Right, and it could be done kind of in the app for the end user, but actually the complexity is again managed by the service providers, the Bitcoin banks in this case, I guess. Now, I guess on the risk side, of course, people will be thinking, well, hang on, haven't there been like bridge hacks and smart contract risk and these kinds of things? Is there a similar parallel here, or is it just, there's just going to need to be that time period for people to, let's say, get comfortable with this? It's a new context, right? It's a new concept, or I guess in some ways, it's a new concept. How do you, address that?
Vast majority of issues that you're referring to are bridge hacks. Like people talk about Oracle risks. Well, Oracle's really haven't like caused that many issues as people would say, or like smart contract risk. Well, like most of these smart contracts have actually been like pretty battle tested over the past few years, and now they secure billions of dollars. So I would say like the bridge and adding like some sort of like centralized entity to managing this bridge like is the biggest risk. And that's why we started this whole conversation with like BitVM and removing the centralization and trying to minimize the trust assumptions as much as possible, and introducing this concept of like one of n, where as long as one party is trusted, then your funds are secure. So that is for sure the biggest issue, and that's also why we're putting the vast majority of our resources into kind of like pioneering these trust minimization of the risk. I'll just end this by saying like these protocols, things like Morpho or Aave or these kind of like smart contract, or as Stephan, as you say, smarter contract ways to borrow. Like these things have experienced huge drawdowns of like 70% in the value of the collateral, and they've survived quite admirably. So while you always want to build a deeper and longer Lindy effect, improve the effectiveness, like these things have been quite thoroughly battle tested.
I think folks are completely right to scrutinize like bridges, to be very clear. We scrutinize bridges. That's why we put, a ton of resources around how do we get better than an honest majority, multi-sig kind of bridge? How do we push the frontier into less and less counterparty risk around the bridge? And at the same time, we're very aware, yes, like maybe the risk shifts more to protocol risks, right? If you're not, less counterparty risks, but you're talking about kind of fancier ZK sort of thing, there's probably inherently maybe more protocol risk. I think to that, I would say one thing that's interesting is if you look at like most of this bridge hacks, and when people talk about bridges, it's been largely all these like centralized or like kind of multi-sig bridges that have been compromised in their keys, etc. It's been mostly that, right, in the last cycle, and a lot of that, and like we are, I think, hence like we're also a very conservative team, generally speaking, in this space. Like we've been focused on mostly building, mostly auditing, mostly testing, and our teams were about 30 people. We have some of the best ZK cryptographers, not just within Bitcoin, but in the entire industry on the team, that were previously formalists, had reviewed various designs, including like our research lead. For bulletproofs, he found some issues before he did formal reviews for all of those things, implemented a lot of that. And so we've strengthened our team and our culture to go around, whatever we're pushing out in terms of the protocol, this is real people's money, and it needs to be 100% as secure as possible and fully, audited. One thing nice about Bitcoin, though, is because of how limited the scripting is in Bitcoin, it actually makes it easier to be sure about like the protocol security around it. Like on Ethereum, if we were settling on Ethereum L1, we're building Ethereum rollup, like in other languages, they're just more involved, and so there's like kind of more rooms for unknown unknowns. I think in some of those languages, Bitcoin script is so limited, right, that it's like the surface area for some of those unknown unknowns is actually much more limited. And as a result, I think, a lot of the work that we're seeing, and we're starting a lot of the audit work, we think that like we can actually just build much safer systems when they're built on Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I would say I think the design that we have right now definitely overcomes a lot of the risks that we initially had and felt around the types of bridges that existed before. And to the full extent that we can, we're auditing, verifying, generating even cryptographic papers and security proofs around all of the protocol related things to ensure that that side is also very safe.
The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 of 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Coldcard hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show.
So, a couple other things, just, I think people would be interested because they may have heard these terms but not really know what they mean. So, for example, this data availability problem, what does that mean? And how are you addressing that in your case?
Sure, I can take it. So there are kind of like 3 concepts. Like one is known as execution, one is known as like data availability, and the third is known as like settlement. And what a zero knowledge proof can compress is the execution or the computation. So a more tangible, I'll try to make like a layman's example here, is like if you have transactions, like imagine just an Excel sheet and you say Alice sent to Bob and then Bob sent to Carol, and then you have all of these transactions. The actual transactions themselves are like the data. And the computation is like the act of the brain or the computer saying, okay, Alice's balance was this. We have 1 transaction. Now I'm updating it to this balance. So there's a difference between like the data of the actual literal transactions and then the act of like computing somebody's new balance. What a zero knowledge proof can do is it can compress any amount of computation, this kind of act of computing the balances, into a very, very succinct proof. You can get near infinite compression on that. But you cannot get this kind of infinite compression on the DA, on the data availability. So there's only so much amount of compression that can go there. So there is still some sort of like scalability limit of how much of the DA you still have to post onto Bitcoin. And this is the primary criticism of rollups. It's that, yeah, sure, you can do EVM and SVM and all this stuff, and you can compress the zero knowledge proof. But if you still have to post this data, which can only be compressed so much into Bitcoin, and we only have 4 megabytes every 10 minutes, then you have an upper bound on the scalability throughput that can happen on Bitcoin. And so just with that, we go, okay, great. We get all this expressivity, and we get like what Sims was saying earlier, like 30 to 50x throughput improvement. That's kind of the fundamental data availability limitation. There are schemes where you could post the data availability on these non-Bitcoin blockchains, and that can give you unbounded throughput, but you're taking on some added trust assumptions. And this is kind of what makes the roll-up conversation so hard. When people say, oh, these things are bound by scalability, it's like, well, no, they don't have to be if users want to post their data availability on these other blockchains. But if they do that, then users' funds could be, they can't be stolen, but they could in theory be censored if this separate data availability layer is to be censored. So the kind of whole overview of this is there's a kind of menu of options that users can choose with their DA. They could opt for the highest level of security, but they're probably going to pay more for that because you have to post it on Bitcoin layer 1, or you can post it in these off-chain DA layers, but you risk some sort of added trust assumption. There's also third options where you yourself could kind of self-custody or self-host your own data. So it's kind of like whatever trade-off that you want, users can choose almost on a per transaction level how they want to handle that data availability problem.
And so can you just explain for me so let's say, coming back to that idea, the end user is just going to use the thing in like an easy app, but that operator somewhere at, whether that's a large exchange or some kind of swapping service, they are going to have to deal with this DA problem. Where do you envision they would put their DA to deal with this stuff? Or is it just that more like you see it more like the user is just going to trust, let's say, that exchange or that swap provider to just host it themselves, to host their own data?
Well, this depends on what time frame. Like when we go to mainnet, probably in Q3 of this year, we will just be posting all of the data directly onto Bitcoin layer 1 to have the highest level of security and trust assumptions. But long term, it will the optionality will go to the users where they could say, hey, I want to have cheaper transaction fees. Therefore, they will kind of choose through their own volition, like where they want to post that data. Does that answer your question, Stephan?
Yeah, so it's kind of just like naturally over time, you envision if there's adoption, assuming there is, then people will just kind of naturally push off to other cheaper chains per se.
Yeah, and I think even in the short term, like we've run the numbers, in Bitcoin, people may not be familiar with these terms, but there are other rollups on Ethereum, things like Base and Arbitrum and Optimism. And you could, in theory, even with Bitcoin's limited block size, fit all of those, like the top 10 rollups in Ethereum. You could fit all of that transaction volume on Bitcoin. So in the short to medium term, like I actually think purely posting DA on Bitcoin is totally viable. You may not have 1 cent transactions, but it can definitely be competitive and it can fit. It's really just when we get to this global scale that then inevitably, yes, like there will be some amount of transactions that will have to go to this off-chain DA. And the analogy that I give here is if you imagine Bitcoin layer 1 is this bucket, you're essentially pouring water into the bucket. That is data availability. The heavier transactions, which people are unwilling to compromise on the security and trust assumptions, will fall into that bucket of Bitcoin. And any kind of lower value transactions will overflow
elsewhere. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's the release
so I
valve
guess
of sorts.
maybe if you could explain just kind of roughly today, or not right now today, but kind of how much data are we talking per block? Like, can you give us an example? Or is it how often does that data have to get posted? Are we talking every block, or is it kind of a once a week, or what's the period there?
Yeah, I think on some of this, like so much of it depends on, what kind of transactions are taking place on the rollup, and they'll have maybe different types of DA footprints on Bitcoin, right? And so I can't really, share, how much data or what that actually looks like. We will probably have a report on this and share kind of our expectations around some of this. In terms of how often we're posting, it'll be, I think every couple of blocks up until, as everything gets more efficient on our proving side, everything else, like we might post it as regular as, kind of one block. But at the moment, I think we're doing maybe once an hour that we're posting on Bitcoin on the Signet and testnet versions. It's really like, I think the fee should be higher on Bitcoin. Like it's supposed to be used for settlement of high value, Bitcoin transfers and any financial transactions where the buyer's willing to pay for the security, and it is the pristine block space, with the highest settlement and double spend security. I mean, this is really, really valuable, and so we're opening it up for new types of activity that allow users to say, hey, this is worth it for me to borrow against my Bitcoin, get dollars out, etc. I'm willing to pay the additional cost, even if it's a bit more expensive. And for the users that are it's a low value payment, etc. They can use alternative DA solutions still within this Bitcoin framework, and they can do that. And so hopefully, like, we'll see mempools not clearing, but like really competitive markets for fees and and real benefits for miners, et cetera, as well, with more activity that's secured through Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Stephan, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious your actual perspective on this, because if there starts to be product market fit and usage for rollups, which we do expect, then yes, I imagine like pretty significant amounts of data will start to be posted to Bitcoin layer 1, and not these kind of like ephemeral spikes like you'd see with like ordinals and JPEG mints, but like, consistent, strong, high fee pressure. And like you could see the sats per VByte on L1 go up not just to 10 or 50 or 100, but like, you could see hundreds of sats per VByte, and like that might cause some chaos in Bitcoin. Like, I think from our perspective, it's like, well, this could be legitimate use. Like, these are people actually using the rollup for payments, or maybe for privacy, or maybe for borrowing, or like name all of your use cases, and you can essentially price out more of the kind of like spam type activities. But like from your perspective, if you don't mind, like, what's your thoughts on that? Like, that could cause a lot of chaos. Is that perceived as spam because it's from rollups? Like, how do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people would, if it were sudden, then it would kind of be like, whoa, what the hell's going on? What is this stuff? If it were sort of like a gradual uptake over time, then I think people would just sort of naturally just kind of, like that same overflowing idea, or people just kind of naturally pushing off. Like what we saw, I think, is when with all the retardinals spam, we saw a lot more, let's say, Lightning adoption. We saw a lot more. Even people are now using Liquid as an example. So I think people would just kind of naturally kind of push off to whatever is next, some other cheaper way of doing a similar thing. Now, yes, in some cases, more people end up using custodial. What can you do about that? I also think it's like we are, not everyone can go on chain. We're just not going to get everyone on chain. And also it is interesting now, as I'm sure you guys are aware, it's kind of funny that the fees are so low when, price is so high, right? Even as we speak now, whatever, it's $81,000 per Bitcoin. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, right? At the depths of the 2022 bear market, it was like 16K, right? And so we're so much higher than that, and yet the fees are still pretty low comparatively, or relatively speaking. So, yeah, I think it's just going to push more people to use, Lightning, Arc, maybe ZK Rollups. People will just use something else, and I don't know. Now, maybe the spam question could come up if it's like non-standard transactions that are not relayed by the normal Bitcoin nodes, this kind of thing. Maybe that could be kind of a contentious point in the community. I don't know. But I mean, for me, if it relates to monetary use, I'm probably okay with that personally. But there may be others who are, I don't know, maybe they don't see it that way. But for me, I find like the retardinal stuff annoying. Like, now, to be clear, I don't believe filtering would stop them, and I don't really think filtering did stop them. I think it was more just they ran out of steam in terms of like paying because it was extremely expensive to do that, right? And it was just, I just think it was kind of like a fad, and we will kind of look back on that the same way we look at Counterparty today from 2014 or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, it's an interesting question. What happens if ZK rollups really do take off? But I think it'll take time. I think the network effect question, I know we spoke about this, and your answer was that, yeah, look, we can already plug into EVM and Solana VM and whatever, all these other things, which is fair. But then, yeah, I just think I don't know. I don't have any predictions on how it all goes. I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I guess my short answer is, if it relates to monetary transactions, I think I'm okay with that. But if it kind of relates to like creating shitcoins and spamming the chain, then I don't like it. But at the same time, I recognize I can't really stop it. So yeah, so that's kind of how I'm seeing it. I guess one other question, because as we've spoken about today, and I think you've been quite clear to show and say, using BitVM style techniques and these techniques, and using your research, this is on Bitcoin today, right? This is not actually requiring a new opcode, some kind of ZK verifier, or I believe from one of your talks, Sims, it was op verify Stark proof as an example, right? So could you just talk us through like what? I guess as an example, like the parallel, how I'm thinking about it is like the same way that some of the Arc guys are building out Arc without CTV or without TX hash or whatever. And maybe over time, if a lot of people use Arc, well, then there'll be a bit more impetus around, oh, hey, we should get CTV or we should get something like that. So I presume it's a similar thing here that if there's a lot of ZK adoption of, let's say, A-BTC or similar techniques in Bitcoin, what would that then mean in terms of like if you were to, again, could be controversial for some listeners, but if you were to talk about an opcode to make it more efficient, what exactly would that look like?
Yeah. As I sort of mentioned, I think, or hinted at before, it's like I feel like there's the design space on Bitcoin is already quite limited. So honestly, any of these opcodes that are proposed right now would certainly expand that design space, and I feel like we can have a lot of creative ways to like, significantly maybe reduce complexity or even get rid of that one event or, do other things. So I would say I'm in favor of opening up the design space slightly, but not like incredibly right on Bitcoin. I think what makes it really interesting is how it's designed and for Bitcoin. I do think we need some form of governance here. I think that would really help get rid of, having an emulation through an NVN multi-sig. And so, insofar as like, I know that there's kind of recent interest around checksig from stack and CTV. I think that combo is quite interesting, and we're investigating how we would simplify our protocol. We think that a lot of the on-chain footprint simplifications can happen with those. I think, we've looked at opcat before as well, and that particularly, is useful because you can verify Merkle trees, in Bitcoin script if you have opcat, and that's such a powerful primitive. It lets you, do things with like Stark verification, or it can, other things like, and I get like some of the, comments about, wow, it seems small, but it's actually quite powerful. I personally, I do like opcat. I think we've investigated it and like looked at all the kind of things that can be done with opcat. I think the other one that I'd really like to highlight is like big integer arithmetic. Just there's, being able to do a little bit more math on would allow for verifying some of these like, incredible cryptographic primitives, like different types of snarks and starks. Big integer arithmetic would be really helpful.
Sorry, Sims, I know you've got to run, so I guess we better wrap up, but we better close it down. Anyway, I will put the links in the show notes, alpenlabs.io. Thanks, David and Sims, for joining me for explaining some of this ZK Rollup stuff.
Really
Thanks,
enjoyed
Stephan.
it. Thank you. Yeah.